Mary's early life is idyllic, but is quickly marred by the breakdown of her betrothal to her cousin and the ennoblement of her half-brother, Henry Fitzroy, followed quickly by Mary's own move to Ludlow Castle, away from her beloved mother. But Mary is a smart child who loves to learn and worships both her parents, reveling in the court's adoration of her, the only legitimate child. Even if her beloved mother, Catherine of Aragon, is getting sadder and sadder every time they see each other, and her father, Henry VIII, appears more short-tempered at every festive occasion. Slowly, Anne Boleyn's name is on people's lips, and Mary takes notice. Even when she overhears Lady Salisbury talking about the king's great matter, she doesn't understand what is happening or why Anne Boleyn is involved. But when Catherine of Aragon, her mother, sits Mary down to tell her that the king has doubts over her parents' marriage, Mary's foundation is shaken. She no longer sees her father in the same glorious light, especially because he is causing her beloved, devout mother, Catherine of Aragon, so much pain. Mary also doesn't understand why her father would want to marry Anne Boleyn, a commoner who isn't even royal, and her child's brain settles on the fact her father must have been bewitched. To her, at this point, it is the only logical explanation, but it is the first of many deep flights of fancy Mary will have throughout her life. Watching Catherine of Aragon, her beloved mother, become sadder and more depressed makes Mary very angry. She is angry at her father for being cruel. She is angry at Anne Boleyn, but most of all, she is enraged by the fact her father cannot see that she, Mary, could make a great queen, just like her grandmother, Isabella of Castile. Mary is in awe of how patient her mother is, especially after the court at Blackfriars doesn't make a decision either way. Mary is screaming on the inside and doesn't know how her mother has managed to stay so calm, deciding that this patience her mother shows is a sign of sainthood. I feel very sorry for Mary as her mother is taken away from her, and then Lady Salisbury, her governess, is taken away from her. It's hard to read. She is just a teenage girl who needs her mother and her governess. However, I have been disappointed by the fact in this book so far there has been no Margaret Douglas. And I think Margaret Douglas and Mary spent a lot of their early teens together, did they not? And there is no Mary Tudor. There is no Frances Brandon. There is no family at all really in this book apart from Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, her parents. This is an odd choice by Alison Weir, but maybe we will get a short story where these characters are included. I am hoping for that. Mary's rebellion against her father is rooted in the fact he has hurt her, and when she is sent to the household to wait on Elizabeth, her baby half-sister, who she believes is a bastard and is treated cruelly by Lady Sheldon, it seems like overkill, this bad treatment of her. Mary blames Anne, not her father, though, and it seems like Mary has developed a get-out clause for Henry, so she can still love him by blaming every cruel thing he does on Anne, even if it was he himself who ordered it. It is completely normal for a child of divorce to hate their new step-parent, though, but Mary takes it one step further, believing Anne is a witch. Mary's hope to escape to the Empire and her cousin's dominions are so realistic for a young woman trapped in a horrible situation. She just wants to escape, and I think it was almost cruel of her mother, Catherine of Aragon, to deny her that hope of escape. Maybe if she had left for the Empire, she would have married and had children and never become Bloody Mary. When Mary's mother, Catherine of Aragon, dies, Mary goes into shock, with her health rapidly declining. I think Mary must be in some form of depression, or at least a stress and anxiety-induced illness. But cut off as she is from the world, word finally reaches her that Anne Boleyn is not in Henry's good graces, and this perks her up. Slowly, members of the court start reaching out to her, viewing her yet again as the only viable heir. When Anne Boleyn's fall happens, it is all very quick, and although Mary is over the moon about it all, it happens off-page. Mary's return to the good graces of her father, King Henry VIII, and the court is marred by the fact she has to sign a document claiming she is illegitimate, and this continues to haunt her throughout the rest of the book. But I don't think the signing of this document and the lead up to signing it was as focused on as it could have been. Mary's only real thoughts about this document are frustration and sadness. I think there should have been more dynastic questions at play. Mary's love for her little half-sister Elizabeth is tainted by the Mark Smeaton rumour, but at this point in the book it is not as prominent in her thoughts as I thought it would be. Mary's love for her little sister Elizabeth is also sad to read because Mary really needs a family to complete her. She has an urge to recreate her idyllic childhood that she lost. Mary's relationship with her father and his new wife, Queen Jane Seymour, is finally on an even keel, but Mary feels awkward. Even after being restored to this succession, she is technically illegitimate, and no prince in Europe will want to marry her. Mary is the vision of spinsterhood. And Mary and Chapuis's relationship isn't really focused on in this book. I would have liked a little bit more of a spark, a little bit of flirtation, but there's nothing like that. I suppose it's quite realistic, but I would have liked a little bit of flirting. When Jane Seymour dies, giving birth to Edward, Mary's grief is real because with the death of Jane dies any hopes of her being allowed to marry and have a family of her own. Mary is also growing very worried about her father because in his grief he is getting fatter and fatter and his black mood isn't lifting, while Cromwell is pushing Henry VIII to remarry again and have more children within weeks of Jane's death, and she thinks this is absurd. Cromwell is such a help to Mary that she starts to think that maybe Cromwell fancies her. And maybe Mary is right. He never remarried after his wife's death. Maybe Lord Cromwell had his eyes set on a princess, even if she was now considered illegitimate. Side note, I am super excited for the second season of Wolf Hall, The Mare and the Light. Who isn't? When Cromwell eventually falls and is executed by Henry, Mary is genuinely sad for him. He was a big help to her. Anna of Cleves and Catherine Howard's rise and fall are very quick in this book. You hardly see them. Though Anna and Mary get on very well, I hope to see their friendship deepen throughout this book, and that didn't really happen, and I felt disappointed. Mary seems to think Catherine Howard is a spoilt idiot child, and that her father, Henry VIII, is a fool for her. But when Catherine Howard's fall comes, Mary feels very sympathetic, especially when Catherine is eventually put to death. Mary thinks her so young and so mistreated by the Howard family. I think there is a bit of there for the grace of God go I, knowing how badly she was treated by her own family only a few years ago. This segment of the book is when Mary starts to worry about the rise of Protestantism and how it is affecting her younger siblings. Mary also is fully convinced now that Elizabeth is Mark Smeaton's child, even though there is no evidence for this, and Elizabeth looks more like their father Henry VIII than any of Henry's other children. When Mary voices her thoughts that Elizabeth is Smeaton's child, no one will even agree with her, and this is a real flight of fancy on Mary's part. When Mary's father Henry marries Catherine Parr, it smooths out all the family drama, and Mary and Elizabeth are restored to the succession, if not legitimated. However, this segment of the book really highlights how naive Mary is about the world around her and how much she lives in her own head. While being part of Catherine Parr's household, she never realizes that Catherine is Protestant or that the ladies surrounding the Queen are very Protestant. When the King, Henry VIII, dies, Mary is devastated. This is not something I was expecting. I imagined Mary would feel vindicated, that Henry will have to account to Catherine of Aragon in heaven, and that Mary would finally feel like he would get his comeuppance for what he did to herself and her mother. Mary is now living in Chelsea with the former Queen, Catherine Parr, but it's not as peaceful as it was when the King was still alive. Elizabeth is not a child anymore to be mothered and played with like a doll, and Catherine Parr is busy with Thomas Seymour. Not to mention the whole country is turning Protestant, and Mary feels out of place and put out in the cold. But Mary is Catherine of Aragon's daughter, and she is incredibly stubborn. At this point, Mary is very alone and decides to latch on to her faith because she has nothing and no one else, fighting the council and the king at every turn who are trying to outlaw her mass. The Elizabeth and Thomas Seymour scandal doesn't really affect Mary, but it makes her wonder about Elizabeth's personality and how much of Anne Boleyn will be in Elizabeth when she reaches maturity. Mary is sad when Queen Catherine Parr dies, and then Thomas and Edward Seymour are executed by their nephew the king, but Mary is almost removed from all this drama. She is far more focused on her religion and keeping her mass than any of this court extended family drama. The chapter where Mary arranges with the Emperor to escape to his dominions in Europe so that she won't be prosecuted for her Catholicism, only for Mary to chicken out at the very last minute, was hard to read because I wanted to shake her and yell, "Just go! Get on the boat and go!" And the fact that she did chicken out like this means that the Emperor has taken the whole idea of her escape from England off the table, and that has made Mary's situation so much worse. Now, if she is prosecuted for her Catholicism, she has absolutely no escape plan. The stupid woman! No bravery there. Her mother and grandmother would be ashamed of her. The Dudleys' rise to power is very worrying for Mary because Northumberland is far more determined than the Seymours ever were to make Mary give up her mass, and she really is feeling that she is fighting for her life and that in a very short amount of time she is going to be accused of treason and thrown in the Tower very soon. The few instances where Mary meets Jane Grey are just awkward, and Jane comes off as a spoilt child, far too strong-willed for her own good. And doesn't that remind you of a teenage girl who was very strong-willed, that kept standing up to her father and putting herself in difficult situations because of her beliefs? But we don't get any comparison in Mary's head, and we don't get enough Jane Grey on page for my liking. I would have liked a bit of an innocent traitor crossover, but we haven't been getting any of that. When Mary finds out that her brother Edward is sick and dying, it is heart-wrenching to read, because Mary really does care about Edward, despite their religious differences. Mary's then flight from Warwick when she finds out that the king is dead shows some real determination. I wish Mary had been this proactive during the rest of her life, especially when it came to her escape to the Emperor's territories. She could have been married and had children by now. Very dynastically important if you are a Tudor. It all happens very fast. The people rally to Mary's call, and without her having to do very much, she is proclaimed queen, and she deserves it. I am happy for her. But this situation is all due to her brother's death, which means it is tinged with sadness for her, and this is something I wasn't expecting. It adds an extra layer of depth to her, and I really thought she would be triumphant at being able to restore the Catholic faith. Mary's meeting with Elizabeth on the way to London was so tender and sentimental, but Mary simply now sees too much of Anne Boleyn in her half-sister and quickly cools towards Elizabeth. This cooling is fanned into suspicion by the new, good-looking Spanish ambassador, Renard, when Elizabeth won't attend Mass. Renard is using Mary's crush on him to his own ends and the progression of Spain's influence in England, and I hate him for it. There is no thought really given here to Jane Grey, and I was expecting Mary to be thinking about her a lot, but she really doesn't. All she keeps saying is that she won't execute Jane. Mary's coronation was not as elaborate as I thought it would be, but it was still a good read. Renard twisting his grudge up against Elizabeth on the run-up to the coronation was great, and then him making sure Mary knew that Elizabeth complained that her coronet was too heavy during the coronation was very manipulative. Good old courtier backbiting. Where would historical fiction be without it? There is, of course, the Wyatt and Courtenay rebellion, but I wasn't expecting much out of this plot. It was badly organised with no real objective, so I wasn't disappointed when reading it. Mary's speech in London was very moving when she won over the citizens, but I can't help wishing she was this decisive all the time. If she was this tough and strong, 24/7, history would be a very different place. The rebellion is squashed easily, and Jane Grey and Guilford Dudley are executed, and I was really hoping for Mary to be on the horns of indecision, but there really is no thought for Jane. There is no mention of Jane Grey's last-minute medical examination to try and save her by proving she is pregnant. The whole thing just seems downplayed, like Mary is giving no thought to this 16-year-old girl who is about to lose her life. Mary herself was in a similar situation not that long ago. Elizabeth's supposed treason drags on and on in the background of this book and is not as exciting as I hoped it would be, but the scene that is recounted to Mary of Elizabeth crying on the tower stairs was very good. Renard's hatred of Elizabeth is palpable, and I'm so surprised Mary doesn't see it, because his venom jumps right off the page. I highly dislike the man. Then Mary is married to the cold fish that is Philip of Spain, and my God, Mary looks for affection in every small tiny detail that he does. He shows her absolutely no affection, but he isn't cruel or unkind. He is completely delighted when Mary announces her pregnancy. I was hoping for a couple of juicy sex scenes between Mary and Philip, and I felt a tad let down when I compared this book to some of Alison Weir's other books. I don't want anything over the top, but I do want a little bit more than what was given to us in this book. As Mary's pregnancy progresses, Philip starts pushing for Elizabeth to be recognized as the legal heir, and Mary is very hurt by this because she sees clearly that Philip is making plans in case she dies in childbed, and Mary is simply jealous of Elizabeth's youth and popularity, because now Mary is actually quite disliked by the general public because she has started burning heretics. As Mary enters her confinement, I lost interest in the book because I know it is all downhill from here, and the poor woman deserves some sort of real happiness. Mary's pain at not knowing why her stomach is deflating and labour hasn't started was hard to read, and Philip is so cruel to Mary about all of this, blaming her for not knowing what is going on with her body. But her pain only serves to make her more devout and more intense when it comes to rooting out heresy and burning heretics alive, because this will help her people. When Philip leaves Mary, she becomes pathetic, begging him to return home. It's not nice reading, because this woman is throwing herself repeatedly at a man and getting rejected. Who wants to read about that? The only way Philip will agree to return to Mary is if she enters his war, and against all her counsellors' advice, she does it. When Philip returns, it's only for long enough to get her pregnant again, she believes, and harangue her about getting Elizabeth married to one of his allies. Mary is desperately lonely, though surrounded by people. These last few pages took me ages to want to read, because Mary is ultimately so pathetic at this point in her life. It's sad to know that she dies surrounded by people, not connected to anyone, praying to God for a child that will never come, and signing warrants to have people burned alive on her deathbed, knowing in her heart that Elizabeth will make the country Protestant and undo what she sees as all her good work. I give this book 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed the first 3/4 of it, but once Mary married Philip, it was all downhill for her personally, mentally, and for her reign. Goodread gives Mary Queen of Sorrow 4 out of 5, and I think this is probably a quite good depiction of her life in general, with the highs and the lows and the tragic end all mapped out. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, because I have tons of historical fiction content, as well as a full playlist of Alison Weir book reviews. You can also follow me on Instagram at Lady Jessica Riddell, and until next time, don't burn any heretics alive. Bye!